afternoon, and welcome to this WIOA webinar for WIOA Title 1B Services Matrix Youth Program Elements. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. Part 1 was presented on Tuesday, and I believe you should have received a follow-up email this morning that has the link to that recording. I will also be putting that link in the chat here in a moment as well, in case you missed that. My name is Brittany Boston, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. And so I am here to help be the moderator and technical support for today's webinar. So if you encounter any issues, feel free to private chat me, and I will do my best to get you taken care of. Just as a reminder, all participants on the webinar do have the ability to unmute. We ask that you refrain from doing this until prompted for the question and answer portion. If you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please post them in the chat box and they will be addressed throughout and at the end of the webinar. We are also recording today's webinar. The presentation, recording, and any materials presented during today's meeting will be available on the Illinois Workforce Academy website, as well as Illinois WorkNet within 24 hours of today's session. To be as accessible as possible, the webinar will be offering closed captioning, so feel free to turn this on using your Zoom toolbar. Tomorrow, each attendee will receive a follow-up email, which will include a survey asking you about today's webinar. We do ask that you please provide feedback and any suggestions you have to help improve upcoming professional development efforts. And so before I hand it over to our presenters today, I do want to take a location poll just to get an idea of who is with us. So you should see that pop up. Where is your local area? Feel free to answer. Allow a few seconds. Okay, I think we've hit a pretty steady response there. So I will end poll and share results. A lot of Northern and Central Illinois, as well as some Chicago and Southern Illinois representation also. So thank you for responding to that. And with that, I am going to hand the floor over to Paula and Laura for today.
Thank you, Brittany. Today's webinar is going to be presented by Paula Berry, who is with the Performance Unit in the Office of Employment and Training, and myself, Laura Dom. I'm with the Policy Unit of the Office of Employment and Training, and we'll get started. So, going over what we did last time, on Tuesday's webinar, we had a discussion about the look and feel of the Title 1B Services Matrix. We identified the categories of the youth program elements and some service definitions. And we outlined how everyone can use the services matrix in their daily activities. And we wanted to make sure that there's a typo. It's not IEP, it's ISS for youth, sorry. And we wanted to reiterate that on Tuesday, we went through some common, understanding some common language. We went through program elements 1 through 4, and some demonstrations, definitions, rules, and practical applications. So today we're going to continue to go over the rest of the 14 elements. The services matrix is a series of interrelated tables that contain and define WIOA Title 1B participant services in relation to service type, service labels, performance impact. And this week's webinars are focused solely on the WIOA youth program services on the matrix. The services matrix was created as a standardized reference tool. Our goal is to have everyone on the same page and to speak the same language. By creating a comprehensive list of the allowable services, service options, and definitions, we will be speaking from the same dictionary and be able to provide a consistent message to all that we work with. It will also establish clear definitions, which should ensure a consistent application of services across the state. So before we get started, we want to be on the same page and speak the same language about what we're going to be discussing and explaining. And so there are 4 elements that are on the services matrix tab that apply to the youth program. The youth program elements, supportive services, work-based learning, and follow-up. Each has different rules and relationships, which we will discuss over this session on youth services. This slide outlines some general rules regarding entry into the MIS or IWDS. We'll typically use MIS in the presentation, but we are referring to IWDS. Don't put actual services that are listed in the matrix under the career planning case management service. You will not get credit for those services. You must document every service in the MIS within 10 days of it being provided, as required in the career planning policy. Services are to be determined by development of the individual service strategy, and the career planning policy also outlines the requirements of the ISS. The services screen will list all of the services provided so that anyone looking at the client can easily see what services have been provided, which is especially important for monitoring. And case notes episodes are used to tell the story about the service. So what are the 14 program elements? The previous session held on Tuesday and this session will assist in clarifying the 14 program elements and explain the services to be reported under each specific element. The services matrix provides an easy reference for finding applicable program elements and service definitions that will facilitate the consistent reporting of services across local areas and prevent duplicated reporting of the same service in multiple reporting categories. So as we showed this slide last Tuesday, here is the slide. We went over elements 1 through 4 during the first session, and today we're going to go over the rest. So I'm going to turn it over to Paula, who is going to start with element 5.
Hi, yes, I am. So for element 5, sorry, I lost my control there for a second with my mouse and my keyboard. So yes, youth program element 5 is where we'll start out today. And this element is called education offered concurrently with workforce preparation. So just like the title kind of says, there's a lot going on under this element. So the definition, as you'll see on the matrix, this is services that reflect an integrated education and training model. There's your IET, integrated education and training, in which adult education and literacy activities, including basic academic skills, are included as part of your alternative secondary school services and dropout recovery. So that's youth element 2. So it's happening concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities and workforce training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster for the purpose of educational and career advancement. So those elements actually were all discussed yesterday. So there you have your alternative school element number 2, the workforce prep activities number 3, and the workforce training, otherwise known as occupational skills training, all occurring together for this youth element. So otherwise known as on the service matrix, what you'll see is it's called integrated education and training, like I mentioned. So the acronym we use is IET, otherwise known as ICAPS. This is an integrated career and academic preparation system. It's the implementation of integrated education and training models in Illinois. ICAPS are aiming to provide integrated pathway in career and technical education for college credit or program certificate opportunities for adult ed and literacy students that are lacking basic skills. ICAPS or IET career pathway programs must be approved by the Illinois Community College Board, the ICCB, to ensure that they have vetted that these three components of IET are provided concurrently as well as contextually as required. So ICCB needs to vet these and make sure that the way that they're contextualized together is appropriate and allowable. So there are a lot of rules to determine and to be aware of the definition to determine the appropriateness of enrollment into this youth element number 5 for IET. So it is a career service. There's only one training service for youth. Like I mentioned in the matrix, it's called Integrated Education and Training, or ICAPS. You will notice in the matrix that there are performance relationships that apply. And since there is the education component, it triggers inclusion in the training measures. So we have a question here to help demonstrate this. Can I provide each of the elements that make up the IET separately and report it here under this service? So we're talking about if you're doing element number 2, 3, or 4, the alternative school, workforce prep, and then some occupational skills training. Can they be done separately, like one, then the other, then the other? So the answer is no. By definition, for to be an IET, each of these three components, 3 youth elements, must be provided concurrently and contextually. The ICAPS IET career pathway programs are developed to address this requirement. So this element is really specific to them being provided concurrently and contextually, and they'll be counted for MSGs and credentials. So with that said, I would like to turn it back over to Laura to talk about youth element 6.
Well, element 6 is leadership development, and services under this program element are focused on encouraging responsibility, confidence, employability, self-determination, and other positive social and civic behaviors. So some allowable activities under this element might include exposure to post-secondary educational possibilities, community and service learning projects, peer-centered activities, including mentoring and tutoring, and organizational and teamwork training, including team leadership training. Also included is training in decision-making, which includes determining priorities and problem solving, citizenship training that includes life skills training, such as parenting and work behavior training, civic engagement activities that promote the quality of life, and this includes in the community, and this also includes voting, and activities that place youth in a leadership role, such as serving on the youth leadership committees or the standing committees, youth committees on the local boards. So this element is a career service, and there is only one service for this element, and it is titled in IWDS as leadership development. So in order to apply this element, we've created a question and answer. And so the question is, what are positive social and civic behaviors? And so some of those might include assisting with a positive attitudinal development, self-esteem building, creating an openness to work with individuals from diverse backgrounds, teaching youth how to maintain healthy lifestyles, including being alcohol and drug-free, maintaining positive social relationships with responsible adults and peers, to contribute to the well-being of one's community, including voting, and to maintain a commitment to learning and academic success. It also includes avoiding delinquency, postponing parenting and responsible parenting, including child support education, positive job attitudes and work skills, and keeping informed in community affairs and current events. So Paula is going to now talk about program element number 7, which is the supportive services.
Yes, thanks, Laura. So supportive services. In the matrix, as Laura said, they're youth element 7. And the general definition for supportive services is that they are to enable individuals to participate in WIOA activities. So supportive services should always address needs or issues that the participant or pre-enrolled participant may identify needing during their intake and assessment process. These could be any issue that would hinder their ability, a youth's ability to participate in WIOA services, and they should be addressed through the provision of supportive services. So that's the goal of supportive services. You need to plan for what supportive services will be needed and then how they will be provided, and they need to be included in the youth's individual service strategy always. So what are the supportive services? They're all captured under this one youth element, but there are many different types. So these could be linkages to community services, assistance with transportation, assistance with childcare and dependent care, housing assistance, needs-related payments, and always keep in mind that's out of school youth only, assistance with educational testing, and then other reasonable accommodations for youth with disabilities. Supportive services are services that enable an individual to participate in WIOA activities. So they need to be tied directly to a WIOA enrollment. These could be legal aid services, referrals to healthcare, assistance with their uniforms or other appropriate work attire like tools, eyeglasses, protective eye gear that they need to go to work or even training, assistance with books, fees, school supplies, and other necessary items for students enrolled in post-secondary education classes, and payments and fees for employment and training related applications like tests and certification. So those fees, and again, all of these when provided need to be predetermined and documented in the youth ISS. So for supportive services, when can they be provided to a Title I youth? So they can be provided either during participation when the youth is a registrant and during follow-up. There are not any specific requirements for when to provide supportive services. So they need to be provided based on the participants' needs as they arise and are identified in the ISS. And then how do they relate to follow-up services? So supportive services are one of the types of WIOA elements that can be provided during follow-up. And that will be discussed when we talk about follow-up. Certain things can happen during follow-up, and supportive services are definitely one of them. If the ISS is calling for it, and if supportive services are provided as a follow-up, they don't extend the date of exit. Most likely in follow-up, the youth has been exited. So there could be an exit date in place. The youth might be known as an exiter, but youth only can receive supportive service at that point. So for supportive services, there's specific rules and some nuances about documenting these in the MIS. For IWDS, local LWIBs must develop supportive service policies that ensure that there are resources and services coordination in the local area. Board's policies should ensure that supportive services are WIOA funded only when these services are not available through any other agencies, and that the services are necessary to participate in Title I activities. So it's the last resort. You have to make sure that if someone else is working with them and can provide it, the resource should be used on something else. So all local staff, especially career planners, must have copies of local policies and understand how to apply the local board's policy. This is really important for supportive services because all the LWIBs have them, and it's been a repeat monitoring finding across multiple areas and during federal reporting. Many rules on supportive services, and the ISS will always be your backup as long as you're using that in accordance with your local policy. So here's a question to demonstrate supportive services and when they're appropriate. Can WIOA funded support services occur during the follow-up period? Yes, all allowable supportive services can be provided for WIOA during their post-exit follow-up. For IWDS, the system won't allow you to go ahead and add a supportive service record when their follow-up service is open. So once they're exited for youth, you're required to provide follow-up, so you have that service open for a year or more. The system is going to stop you from adding your supportive service. So what happens post-exit when you need to leave their follow-up open is what you're doing as a supportive service should be documented in a general case note only. And this rule is going to apply just the same at the deployment next week on March 10th. Nothing has been updated to change that. So post-exit, during follow-up, all of your supportive services activities are going to be documented just in a case note. The episodes won't be allowed based on the youth being exited. So with that said, I will provide you with a demo of the supportive services as they are seen in your youth tab in the services matrix. So supportive services are element number 7. And you will notice, can everyone see this okay? I can zoom in. Maybe that's zoomed in too much, sorry. And then you'll notice in the definition that all of the activities I mentioned are listed. So you'll have this for a reference. The employment measures are just your WIOA performance measure relationships are the employment measures. Supportive services don't trigger any MSG or credential type measures. So something that it just came out today that Laura already reviewed is another new TEAGL from DOL. And in that guidance, we were told that supportive services, if directly tied to the completion of a work experience, could count towards your youth work experience 20% minimum. So this was updated in the matrix just now. So another relationship of supportive services might be a tie to your WEX 20%. They may trigger participation, but they need to be provided along with another youth element. Okay.
Paula,
so,
can you show the supportive services tab?
Yes, sure. I was looking here. Here we go. This darn mouse, I keep losing it. Here we go. Okay, so like Laura just mentioned, there is a specific tab in the matrix that just lists the supportive services and details the definition and appropriateness of each. So they're all same-day services, and every single one of them is listed here. So for supportive services for youth, they are considered a youth element. So this is a relationship or a rule for reporting. However, in the current system, really a supportive service should be backed up by another type of element. So in this case, what you would do if for some reason, as I mentioned, and I can go back up to the general definition, you would use this tab in the matrix to determine an appropriate other element that would be tied to the supportive service and document them at the same time. And we will give you specific examples as we go through the rest of the youth elements, but just keep in mind, if your youth needs a supportive service first, like tools to start a job or books, there must be another appropriate youth element documented alongside the supportive service to justify it and document it in the system so it can be provided before that youth element. And we will, we have them and we'll be glad to give you specific examples of those elements. So with that said, let me get this out of here and move on for Laura to cover the next youth element.
The next youth element is adult mentoring. And this program element involves a formal relationship between a youth participant and an adult mentor that includes structured activities where the mentor offers guidance and encouragement to help develop the youth's competence and character. So youth are to be matched with an individual who provides face-to-face interaction. This includes being matched with an employee of a company. This must be a formal relationship, and those structured activities have to offer guidance, support, and encouragement for the mentee. Mentoring services must last for at least 12 months. It may occur during participation or as a follow-up service after exit. So this is another one of those elements that can be provided after follow-up or during follow-up. LWIBs the local boards must have a process to adequately screen and select mentors. And that while DOL strongly prefers that career planners not serve as mentors, they may in areas where adult mentors are scarce. But obviously, DOL encourages that we find adult mentors out in the community. The adult mentoring is a career service, and there is a single service in the system to capture this, and its label in the system is adult mentoring. So we have a question and answer next. If a staff member of our service provider mentors youth during the summer, does that count as adult mentoring? Next slide, Paul. There you go. And the answer to that is no. Adult mentoring has to last for 12 months, similar to follow-up. So, and the activities provided by the service providers must meet the definition of the adult mentoring. So it has to be structured. So there has to be a relationship there. So we want to make sure that as we're talking about adult mentoring in the field, that you're aware of that aspect of the element. So now I'm going to turn it over to Paula for follow-up.
Okay, so follow-up is youth element number 9, and services under this element are provided after exit to help ensure that your youth is successful in their employment or post-secondary education and training. Some follow-up services may include other program elements, and to count as follow-up services, they must occur after the participant's date of exit. Follow-up services may begin immediately following the last expected date of service in the youth program and any other program in which a participant is co-enrolled if the states are using a common exit policy. That's when no future services are scheduled. Follow services do not cause a participant's exit date to change or trigger re-enrollment in the WIOA youth program. For youth, they must be enrolled in follow-up services for a minimum of 12 months. There are 2 exceptions to this if you cannot locate them or they decline services. The 12-month follow-up requirement is completed upon 1 year from the date of exit. Follow-up services for youth may last longer than 12 months. And again, LWIBs will have local policy on follow-up services, so everyone should be aware of that. And if any questions, always see your local policy that your board has set on follow-up. They may include regular contact with the youth participant's employer, including assistance in addressing work-related problems that arise. So that is just one example of the types of activities that might go on after exit when you have follow-up open for your youth. You're helping them succeed in their employment. So under the matrix, follow-up services are a career service, and they're called follow-up services as well. Their relationships, as you will note in the matrix, they obviously don't count towards your WEC's 20% minimum. They're not a same-day service. Once you open a follow-up service, there is no end date until you close it out when all the follow-up is completed per policy and per the ISS. Question: can youth follow-up services for youth participant, or I'm sorry, can follow-up services for youth participants include other program elements? The answer is yes. Follow-up services for youth include the following program elements. So it's one thing that's going on post-exit, but some elements can still be provided. That is pretty unique to follow-up services. They're different. It's a whole different phase of a youth's participation going on during this time. So supportive services can happen during follow-up, adult mentoring, the element that Laura just talked about. Financial literacy education is another element we will discuss. Services that provide labor market and employment information, your LMI activities, and activities that also will help the youth prepare and transition to post-secondary education and training are all defined as youth elements that you can do during follow-up. So they must occur again after the exit date in order to count as follow-up services. That's a reporting rule. So they have to be documented appropriately. Okay, I will show you the matrix once again. There is a specific tab just for follow-up services within the matrix. So it's a reference, even though they're listed for the programs in the matrix, it's just a nice reference to be able to go straight to this tab. And once you're in it, please realize that the top portion under follow-up is for adult and dislocated worker. So for youth programs, you'll want to see the definition specific to youth. They're not a same-day service again, and all of them are listed here. And then the note that we always show in this dark blue, it's important to remember that they follow-up services don't trigger enrollment. They're not allowed to be provided as a first enrollment service ever. And they don't extend participation in WIOA, nor do they extend exit, which makes sense because they're provided after exit. So that is just one thing that we want to point out. So you know it's the pink tab on your matrix. Let me move this out of the way. Okay, so with that said on follow-up, I'll hand it back to Laura.
All right, I'm going to go over youth program element 10, which is comprehensive guidance and counseling. And we know that this is one of those elements that is greatly misunderstood. And the TEAGL that was released today further helps define that. And so we're going to make sure that you look at that TEAGL so that you can see that as well. But comprehensive guidance and counseling element focuses on drug and alcohol abuse counseling, mental health counseling, and referral to partner programs as appropriate. Counseling to participants includes drug and alcohol abuse counseling, mental health counseling, referral partner programs. Things such as violence prevention are also covered under this element. This element is not the day-to-day career counseling. That should be reported as an additional episode to the youth career planning case management activity. And again, Teagle 922 is released today. And so that further reiterates that this program element is not to be recorded for general case management. And it also states that another element that commonly gets reported here is the career awareness, career counseling, and career exploration services. And those are actually under element 13. And Paul is going to go over that later in the presentation. So when referring participants to necessary counseling, local youth programs must coordinate with the organization it refers to. That refers the youth to ensure continuity of service. And when qualified resources exist within the local program or its service providers, it is allowable to provide counseling services directly to the participants rather than refer them to partner programs. Now, career guidance and counseling is a career service, and there's only one service in the service matrix for this element, and its label is comprehensive guidance and counseling. See, we try to make this as easy as possible. We have a question and answer here to help with the application of this. Question, one of our career planners has experience with addiction and would like to speak to our participants as an adult mentor. Can they do that? And the answer is no. Informal guidance and counseling from well-meaning but inexpert individuals is not allowed. It has to be from someone that is qualified to provide those services. So I just wanted to point that out. So again, element 10 is basically for drug and alcohol counseling, mental health counseling, to assist those youth in instances where they have some trauma that they need to overcome to participate in our services. So now I'm going to turn it over to Paula to talk about the program element 11.
Thank you. Program element 11 for youth is financial literacy education. Services under this program element are intended to help youth acquire knowledge and skills and the confidence to make informed and effective decisions with their financial resources. So the goal when enrolled in this element is to help a youth attain a greater financial health and stability by providing high quality, age appropriate, relevant, and where possible, customized services for financial literacy. It is a career service, and the label is financial, literally financial literacy services. So note that the DOL element used education. We're using services because this is a career service. It's not a type of education that would have a relationship or tie to or trigger the MSG or credential. So we just wanted to clarify that there. As determined in the ISS, these need to be made available for youth. So what type of activities, or what are the activities that are considered financial literacy education for youth? What are the services that might assist them? And so it could be information on budgeting, managing their bank account and making more informed financial decisions, more effective management of their own spending, credit, and debt, significance of credit reports and credit scores, what they mean and why they're important, ability to understand, evaluate, and compare financial products, services, and opportunities, educate them about identity theft and ways to protect them, address the financial literacy need of non-English speakers, address financial literacy needs of youth with disabilities, also provide financial education that's age appropriate and timely, and then implement other approaches to help them attain greater financial health and stability, which all makes sense to do with a youth whose goal for employment and to start earning their own and gaining their own wealth. With that said, back to Laura. For entrepreneurial skills training. Or actually, no, I'm sorry. I'll cover entrepreneurial skills.
No, I've got it. I'm sorry. I lost my unmute button there. Entrepreneurial skills training is program element 12, and that's services under this program element provide the basics of starting and operating a small business to develop the skills associated with entrepreneurship. So this service provides the basics of starting and operating a small business. Such training must develop the skills associated with entrepreneurship, and those skills may include the ability to take initiative, creatively seeking out and identifying business opportunities, developing budgets and forecasting resource needs, understanding various options for acquiring capital, and be able to communicate effectively and market oneself and one's ideas. And you also notice here that this is not a same-day service and that it does not apply to the work experience expenditure requirement. Again, this program is a career service. It is not a training service, even though the word training is in the name of the element. I know that confuses a lot of people. The label for the single service for this element is Youth Entrepreneurial Skills Training. So what are some of the other activities that are considered entrepreneurial skills training? And some of those may include entrepreneurship education, and that provides an introduction to the values and basics of starting and running a business, such as developing a business plan and simulations of business startup and operation. Another is enterprise development, which provides support and services that incubate and help youth develop their own business, such as helping them access small loans or grants and providing more individualized attention to the development of viable business ideas. And the last is experiential programs that provide youth with experience in the day-to-day operation of a business and can facilitate placement in an apprenticeship or an internship position with adult entrepreneurs in the community. So now I'll turn it back over to Paula for 13.
Okay. Youth element 13 is services that provide labor market information. And there are 4 elements that can be reported under this. So these are all services that provide labor market and employment information about in-demand industry sectors or occupations available in the local area, such as career awareness, career counseling, and career exploration services. The method of delivery and the particular services and information should be determined by the needs of the individual youth. Labor market information should be presented in formats that are easily understood and usable. So, for example, as you can see, I hope you can see the matrix. Under this element, there's a service called labor market information, LMI. We refer to it as LMI all the time. This might be when you're doing an employment referral or placement assisted, staff assisted. So that's when a career planner is actively working with the employer to place a youth in that job. Vocational exploration activities and everything that falls under that. And then your group workforce research and job club. So those all fall under this element number 13. And this is useful, we think, because it's probably being done all the time, quite a bit with your youth. So at the point when you've discussed all of the things that go into those pre-enrollment activities, you've probably done one of these. So it might sometimes be their first enrollment youth element that is going to trigger their participation. Again, don't quote me. I'm just giving you an example of things that we think occur but are probably underreported. And now that we have the matrix and all of this detail for each definition and activity and examples, we're looking for these things to get reported more often. Going back to the supportive service, here's another example for you. Since I mentioned the system won't allow you to go into it and open up a supportive service record if it's their first service. So if you need to get them boots, to provide boots or some other tools to start their employment, and you need to report the supportive service on the day it happened for fiscal and other reporting compliance reasons, you need to get that supportive service in. So for example, if it's tied to them starting their job and you help them, find that job, you could open up or enroll them in this youth element. And for example, it might be the referred to employment and placement assistance. And therefore, that would allow the supportive service needed to be recorded, and that is completely appropriate and allowable as a means for documenting that supportive service when it needs to happen as their first enrolling activity. So that's our note. Since IWDS won't allow a supportive service to be recorded prior to another element, when the ISS, so going back to their individual service strategy for youth, when it deems that that support is necessary to happen first, programs should always kind of use the LMI services and review all of these, because some of them are probably appropriate to document alongside that supportive service, even like a WEX or employment placement. So services that provide labor market information, all of them are a career service. Again, we have the LMI, the referred to employment placement assistance, vocational exploration, and group workforce research and job clubs, and they're all defined in the matrix. None of these trigger the MSG or credential measures. They don't count towards your WEX 20%, and they're same-day services. They also may trigger participation, extend exits, and they count as an enrolled service. It may be provided as a youth's very first program element. And I should clarify right now, any of these could be provided as your first youth program element. We just wanted to point this out to facilitate when the ISS calls for their support to be first. As an example, when you examine these definitions, how it will help you figure out how to document them. So application examples of these services include, but they're not limited to, providing labor market information and employment information about your in-demand sectors. I kind of read through some of these already. You can help your participant use different tools and applications to gather LMI and career information, and then they would be able to do it on their own too. They provide access to skills, ability, or interest inventories. You can discuss state and local LMI with participants, local labor market information. You can provide information about resume preparation or assisting youth with resume preparation. So your resume activities would fall under this LMI. You can assist and help them on interviewing, discuss opportunities for work experience, and also discuss long-term benefits of post-secondary education, such as increased earning power and career mobility. So these activities cover a lot and probably happen quite a bit, so should be documented. So we're going to highlight vocational exploration. This is their rules for reporting the service, and it's about career awareness, counseling, and exploration. So this step begins the process of developing knowledge on a variety of careers and occupation available, their skill requirements, working condition, training prerequisites, and job opportunities across a wide range of industry sectors. Career counseling or guidance provides advice and support in making decisions about what career paths to take. They might provide information about resumes, again, interviewing skills, or even opportunities for WECs, like job shadowing, and along with letting them know the long-term benefits of post-secondary education. Career exploration can be described as the process in which youth choose an educational path and training or a job that fits their interests. So again, this might be an option for when your youth is needing a supportive service first, if they need transportation to get to an interview. So this could be documented alongside that supportive service, and that would be appropriate. So Laura will explain the 14th youth element.
Okay, thank you, Paula. The last youth element is post-secondary preparation and transition activities. And services under this program element prepare in-school and out-of-school youth for advancement to post-secondary education and training after they attain a high school diploma or its recognized equivalent. These services include exploring post-secondary education options, including technical training schools, community colleges, four-year colleges and universities, and registered apprenticeships. A practical list of services can include assisting youth to prepare for SAT and ACT testing, assisting with college admission applications, searching and applying for scholarships and grants, filling out the proper financial aid applications and adhering to changing guidelines, and connecting youth to post-secondary education programs. So again, this is a career service, and there's only one service in the matrix for this element. It is called post-secondary prep and transition activities. With the ampersand, and we want to note on this that this element may be appropriate for adding to document supportive services for books or other supplies needed to start post-secondary education. So we have a question answer here for the 14th youth element. Does utilizing the scholarship finder on the Career One Stop website count as an activity that can be recorded under this youth element? And the answer is yes. The use of websites and apps to assist in finding scholarships is acceptable. Other sites include Going Merry, FastWeb, and Peterson's. And in addition, local school districts often have college rooms in their high schools that can be a source for you to find local scholarships that may be available. So we're going to, this is additional non-enrolling activities, and this is Paula.
So we're going to highlight youth activity. So Laura just spoke about the very last 14th youth element. So training paid by non-WIOA Title I funds is a mechanism for recording or tracking when a youth is in a training outside of your WIOA Title I program. So there are rules for reporting this. It's a non-enrollment activity and should only be recorded in specific circumstances as a mechanism to indicate, again, when your WIOA participant is a co-enrolled in another partner program and is being provided a training service not funded by WIOA adult or youth, in this case, youth funds, and is also receiving a WIOA youth element. So career planners must provide justification for the need for wraparound WIOA service to meet the participants' employment goals outlined in their ISS. So this is like a backup for saying, I'm providing them this youth element, but and I'm talking about training over here in the ISS, but the training, I don't have the training record. I don't have them enrolled in an occupational skills training, but they're doing it over here. It's non-WIOA funded, so no, you would not put them in an occupational skills training, but it's a way to see that or visualize it in a list of the youth elements that you see in the record. And it would justify some things that you're providing. This other type of documentation will not flag participants for inclusion in the training measures unless they're provided another additional WIOA funded training service. So basically, this is a placeholder. It is not reported. It doesn't trigger any measures. It doesn't count towards a youth WEX. It is just a useful way to keep a visual or an optic on seeing that they have some training going outside what you're doing. So question to demonstrate when it's appropriate to add this type of record. My participant is a WIOA Title I youth who is getting training services from another partner program. We're providing them with their adult mentoring and leadership services. Can I provide them with supportive services? So yes, if the supportive service is tied to one of the elements being provided. So if you think about it that way, it answers a lot of questions about when it's appropriate or allowable to provide a supportive service. It needs to be tied to one of the elements. WIA should add the training paid by non-WIOA Title I funds, so there's a clear record to support the funding of supportive services under WIOA. And again, it must always be in the ISS. And you must also indicate the program providing the actual training service in the ISS in case notes, as well as in a concurrent program screen in IWDS. So it needs to be in your case notes, ISS, and then it's documented on a separate screen in the MIS. When a participant is co-enrolled, the following must be coordinated across the programs: their individual service strategy, all of the elements they're receiving, and their exit. One more service we're going to highlight that is not really a service, it's an activity, and it's documented to support and justify a hold or a gap in active service, and it kind of is a placeholder for their spot in your program. So it's called plan gap or holding, and it's for participants who have a planned gap in their WIOA Title I services that's going to be for longer than 90 days, shouldn't be exited if the gap is due to one of the following circumstances. So you don't really just want to exit them if they have something like this going on. If it's just a delay before they can begin their training, it's not their fault. A health or medical condition, or maybe providing care for a family member with a health or medical condition that's preventing them from participating. Temporary move from the area that might prevent them from participating in services, and this can include military. So there are rules, and the plan gap may not last more than 180 consecutive calendar days from the date of the most recent service. All plan gaps must be documented in the system by adding a record called plan gap holding, and the reason for the gap and anticipated return date must be documented along with this service. So you have to say the exact reason, supporting documentation needs to be available, and then you have to have a return date in mind for them to complete their services. So they need to be predetermined. Predetermined gaps in certain participation can be documented, and the individual during this time. So once you add this plan gap, it won't change their status at all in the system. They will remain in participant, or in other words, registrant status, and they don't need to be exited per the 90-day rule because you have your plan gap documented. Documentation needs to be provided and kept in the file to support the circumstance, medical or other. So if it's deemed necessary in a youth's ISS, the participant can still receive youth elements while waiting to resume training. So if the plan gap was documented because they're injured and can't start a training, we're not saying that they can't have any other youth elements or career that are determined necessary in the ISS to help them along their way. However, during their plan gap, another element or activity isn't required to be open alongside this because they're technically not active anyway. You're just not having to exit them during this phase. If no other services are being provided and open, the participant will show up on 90 days with no active services reports. Plan gaps are never allowed to document just because a participant cannot be located. So you don't just document this waiting around for them to show up again or contact you again. It has to be one of those specific, possibly extenuating circumstances that you're allowed to bypass the 90-day rule and hang on to them, waiting to resume their WIOA participation. So here's a question and a situation that might that would make this appropriate. My participant has provided me with documentation of a medical issue and it's preventing them from resuming their occupational skills training, that's their welding program in the spring. They have been making successful progress up until this point, and the nature of their injury would make it impossible them to even attend their upcoming courses. How do I document that in the MIS and IWDS so the participant isn't flagged for exit? So again, the career planner must record this using the planned gap holding service. Documentation of their medical injury and their anticipated return date must be kept in the case file and outlined in their case note and ISS. Another question for applying youth elements. Does the department require local programs to use Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds for each of the 14 program elements? So do the 14 program elements need to be WIOA funded? The answer is local WIOA youth programs must make all 14 program elements available to youth. That not all services must be funded with youth funds. Local programs should leverage partner resources to provide program elements that are available in the local area. So maybe outside of your LWIA, but with a partner. And if a local program does not fund an activity with WIOA Title I youth funds, the LWIA must have an agreement in place with the partner to offer the program element and make sure that the activity is connected and coordinated with the WIOA youth program. If enrolled, if your youth happens to go ahead and participate with that program element or participate in the program element. And a couple more reminders on program exits. If a participant is employed and is not in need of any further services, please prepare for exit. So also to remember, if no services have been provided to the participant in 90 days, there's no plan gap documented, and you have no plans in their ISS to provide any future services, they must be exited. There are no exceptions to that rule. Customers should be offered follow-up services. Youth are required follow-up services, but if the exceptions occur, that needs to be case noted. And there are reports made available in the Illinois Performance Accountability and Transparency System called IPATS to determine when participants have not been receiving services and should be reviewed for exit following the 90-day no service rule. So that's no service within 60 or 90 days or 120 days. A couple more reminders regarding program exit. So prior to entering an exit record, the following information, this is a great checklist, should always be corrected, because once the exit is documented, programs, OES can't undo it. Every service needs to be recorded. And before you do that, you need to be closing any open services by adding an end date and completion status. Completion statuses were discussed yesterday or Tuesday, I'm sorry. All supporting documentation has been obtained and is physically located in the file, and case notes are entered. All their credentials or diploma certification have been added to the credential record. And then those appropriate credentials are also need to be selected on the exit record to count for their performance.
Paula, we lost you.
Oh, you lost me? Hello?
It might be Laura. We can hear you, Paula.
You
Laura
can
may
hear
be
me
having
now?
some troubles.
There she is. There. Go ahead, Paula.
So did you lose me when I was talking about the exits file documentation? We need all the credentials documented on the credential record, and they also need to be added to the exit record to count for performance. All of their MSG, their measurable skill gains that they achieve, need to be recorded, and the exit record will always ask for a school status, an exit, and an exit reason. If the exit reason is an exclusion, something like deceased or medical, and it excludes them from the performance indicators, then there needs to be supporting documentation or validation included in the file. A separate exit reason is required for each co-enrolled program. Okay. So at this time,
Paula, yeah. Thanks, Laura. Paul, this is Mark Burgess with the policy unit. I've been kind of helping respond to some of the questions. And we do have 3 or 4 that are outstanding. So I'd like, we might need a little bit of assistance, but I'd like to go back to those since I was monitoring the chat. We had 2 questions related to some expenditures during follow-up. Get back to those. One was, can money be spent on supportive services and follow-up? And that's since supportive services are an allowable service in follow-up for youth, then certainly you can pay for those, such as childcare, transportation, things of that nature. So yes, that's a yes. The other one wasn't related to incentives and other cash kind of stipends and that. And so I don't know, Paula or Laura, if you have the answer to that, whether those are allowable for youth. And I think the question was more specific to during follow-up.
Yeah, cash stipends are typically related to work experience. And that's why you'll find that activity under element 3 for work experience and not for anything that is allowed for follow-up.
Okay, great. So we've got those 2. The other 2, I think, outstanding were related to IWDS. The first one was if we can provide, say, financial literacy or some other follow-up service. We know it has to occur after program exit, but Paula or Jim, maybe you know, does the system allow you to enter that the same day, or because there's an overnight lag, it probably shouldn't be provided until the next day? Because, if I exit someone at 8 o'clock in the morning, in theory, they have exited the program. I could start providing follow-up, but is it required they wait till the following day is the question.
no.
Hi, this is Jim. This is Jim. Let me answer that question. On this, for folks, a real important distinction for youth that's in follow-up. It's allowable to provide a supportive service, but it has to be allowable in your local policy, but it's typically going to be for an occurrence of something that's not normal. It's not like when somebody exits, we're going to continue to pay their transportation, continue to pay their childcare. What it's for is, let's say you got a youth that's in follow-up and their car breaks down and they're in risk of having to lose their job or drop out of school. Well, that's when it makes sense that we would step in, provide that supportive service. We would update the ISS to explain what we're doing, and And again, it has to be allowable in your local supportive service policy to provide that. So then you would provide it, and you would just case note what you're doing with that. And that's all the same guidance for those other allowable youth activities that can be occur for a youth that's in follow-up, which includes adult mentoring, financial literacy education, labor market information. That's just, if the services are provided, it's just case notes. It wouldn't be recorded as part of a service. It's just ongoing during follow-up. Those activities should be occurring. So those would not be going into services at exit time or after exit. It's just part of follow-up is where they're recorded in. That answer those questions?
Well, yeah, let me follow up, but we've got another one I think you might be able to help. But to follow Jim up and what Paula presented, I kind of repeated in the chat, is those kind of services really you should be looking towards, are there potential other agencies, other supportive companies, or probably not a good word, companies, but are there other means to get those? There's a lot of assistance provided in communities that could help our participants out, and we're really, as we tend to say at times, we're kind of the last resort. So just because someone needs transportation, if there's some other means that they can get to their work, even in follow-up, then that should be the option being used if it seems feasible. Not WIOA dollars. We shouldn't just be, willy-nilly kind of making a decision we can spend our money just because it's allowable. But really the other question, Jim, was if follow-up is supposed to occur after program exit, can those be the same day if, let's say, I exit someone at 8 o'clock in the morning because I, finished my services with them the day before and I entered in the system. Can they start follow-up the day they exit, or does it have to be the next day?
No, actually follow-up is started before the exit. Follow-up begins when all services are completed and no other services are planned. And if you think about exiting, you don't exit somebody until they go 90 days without a service. So if we wait all the time till we exit somebody before we start doing that follow-up, that exit date's going to retro back to the last enrolling service. So a lot of times it's going to be 3 months in the past. So follow-up should be started is following the plan, the ISS. Once the overall goal has been reached and all objectives have been reached in our plan, and we have no other services planned, that's when they transition from enrolling services into follow-up. So technically follow-up would get opened prior to the client being exited. But then once those 3 months, those 90 days pass to the last enrolling service, when the client gets exited, the exit date's going to retro back to 90 days in the past, or to the last enrolling service. And then those first 3 months of follow-up should already be done. And that follows right along with the follow-up policy that requires once a month contact for the first 3 months. And that's in the follow-up policy.
Okay. Great. And then some others on large gaps in service. Joel asked, someone is in a planned gap status, and let's say it was planned for 160 days of gap, but on 150th day, they say, we don't need you. We don't need WIOA anymore. They can't continue their training. That was the purpose or reason for the planned gap. What should be the actual date of service end? If, because they might not have had services for 150 days, but they were intending to.
One of the things you got to think about holding is we shouldn't just use it as a vacuum. Like if we put somebody in holding because they have something going on, then we don't even have interaction with them until that 6 months or whatever period's over. Hopefully we're having two-way communications all along, and it's not like we haven't talked to the person in 4 months or 5 months, now all of a sudden they decide they're not doing it. But in the case that what you're explaining, Mark, that somebody wasn't holding, and then after that, 5.5 months, they decide, hey, I'm done with services. Well, the exit would end up having to go all the way back to the last enrolling service if there hasn't been one since.
Okay. But if that occurs, what's the date they should enter in the system? The last day they had it, let's say, at training services, or the day, since they're in plan gap, the day that they were informed that they no longer want to continue to participate?
Well, it'd be whatever's been recorded as the last service prior because they've got put in holding, the way this question is explained, they would be put in holding, so it's still going to go back once holding's done to the last enrolling service if there's never going to be another service provided.
But Jim,
Correct.
I
This
think,
planned holding is not a enrolling service.
but if they leave the training, say they did it for an occupational skills training and that just had a start date, are you asking what date to use to end the occupational skills training record that was never completed or they never went back to? That's how I read it.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
think that's what Joel's asking.
Yeah. So
And so in that instance, since it was 150 days, they'd have to request you or I to actually do the program exit because it's well beyond 90 days.
not necessarily. If they left, so if you put your person in a plan gap because they come to you and say, and there's no other, it's a youth and you didn't give them another career element, but you had their occupational skills training line open and they said, I broke my leg, I can't go back to training, you would leave their occupational skills training line open during their planned gap. So then they come to you 150 days later and say, I'm done, never mind. It wouldn't even be a matter of exit. They would have to close this occupational skills training with a date. So I think we're wondering what that date would be. 150 days later when they say we're done, or the date they decided they broke their leg, they couldn't go back, they ended it. Does that make sense? I thought that's how I read the question, since you have that actual element remaining open.
Right. I think that's what Jim's saying is that was all the last service. I think, though, what he's saying is hopefully with these youth, we're not going 150 days without, I mean, you would think they would need something. Many of these youth are very, have many challenges and barriers, and to just say, okay, you called, you said, hey, I can't participate for 150 days. Okay, we'll mark it down. And then you don't talk to them, you don't provide them anything. More than likely, they're going to need something to keep them active, to keep them engaged in the system. And so that would be more your last service, not necessarily the end of the training.
The elements provided within their gap.
Right.
Okay. Yes. So the closure of it wouldn't matter. Okay.
Yeah. And then Jim, maybe, or Paul again, Christine's indicating that if IWIDS doesn't allow for a new service episode to be added beyond 90 days, when there's a planned gap in service, will IWIDS program be changed to allow a new service to be entered after a gap of more than 90 days? And I don't think that's an issue because of the planned gap kind of holds it open, doesn't it?
No.
No, it's a non-enrolling service, but the system shouldn't stop, and I'll let Jim finish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm still confused on why haven't we done anything with them for 90 days? Because it still goes back to just because we put them in a holding for like a training, what Mark had spoke about, we shouldn't be disappearing on the person. I mean, that's why we do like 12 months of follow-up after exit to keep them engaged, even an exit to keep them around. So if we're still going to be having this person considered as a registrant, I would still be having that two-way communication and maybe other things.
For youth, though, even if they were updating their youth career planning or ISS along the way, it's not going to trigger any extension of participation. So no matter how many times that career planning was documented for the youth, unless they had actual elements happening during the plan gap, their exit date would fall back. I mean, those career planning iterations, no matter how many episodes, it's not extending it out. So there'll be a point where 90 days might lapse where they haven't received an element if you're just checking to make sure, so in that case, IWDS won't be updated. It still probably won't let them add that. So you'll need to go in for youth. I'm trying to think what would be appropriate. I mean, there must be some element.
Paul, I'm going to piggyback off of what you'd said earlier about when somebody needs to do a supportive service when they're not enrolled yet in training, like we're maybe going to buy their books in advance and you spoke about labor market information being a good type of service. So if the person is in the youth program, especially if they're, depending on what's going on with them, I would be thinking there would be some research going on careers, research on occupations, where that labor market information service activity, that's an enrolling activity, could be utilized in some of those circumstances. Still there?
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks, Jim, Paula. I don't know that I'm seeing any additional questions. I hope we've responded to all of them. Certainly, if you think of any moving forward,
Mark, but to
next couple
piggyback
slides,
off
we'll talk about the way to present them.
Mark, to piggyback off of that last portion, that is something that we need as the state. We need to have some guidance together on what we do want to do, because it's a very valid point with the youth that Paula brought up, that no longer career planning case manager is not an active service. So we are going to need something, or else we're going to run into a lot of issues with these youth of those kind of cases if they're in holding. So we do need to have, this should be one of those topics that's followed up in one of these other questions that we get a firm answer on it.
And as Preely mentioned, underneath that service, that youth career planning and case management is a non-enrolling service any longer. Typical day-to-day counseling is underneath that element 13. So you would put it underneath that LMI. That's going to be the service that you would typically think of in the past as career planning. So that's what I would suggest that they use.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example for all of you out there. You know, typically they're not complete with certain services, probably training. And if there's a big gap, that would be a reason to engage with them to say, hey, we know you're not quite done with training, but we want you to realize LMI data is indicating a little bit of shift and change. You need to be aware of when you start applying for jobs, once you do get back into training. I'm just using this as an example. You know, it may prompt a conversation between career planner and coach and the participant to say, I know we had our plan, but you know, data is saying a little bit different with this big gap we've had. And you might want to be thinking about other occupations related to your training, or other companies, or, you know, other information you would include on your resume, or et cetera. So there's certainly many reasons why you would keep that engagement during those planned gaps, because things are always changing.
Yeah, this is Chris. This was my original question, Mark and Jim. And one of the challenges is if someone's in extended medical care, we may not even be able to contact them in that 90-day period, let alone, you know, if somebody's got a significant medical situation. Rehab sometimes comes into play for folks where we don't really want to exit them, but they can't engage. We may not be able to reach them in 90 days, even to, you know, give that LMI information or do some coaching about education or anything like that. It has been a real challenge. And if it's to keep it open up to 180 days, that 90 to 180 days is that challenge period.
And that's understandable, Chris, what you're speaking about, because stuff happens in life. So you're 100% right, it does. And that is where one of the benefits, especially on the extreme medical issues, that it does have that avenue of a neutral exit for health medical reasons. So if somebody has a really severe, it may be consideration of not holding is using that health medical to exit the person and have them reapply when they're better.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this should go back to their planned date of return. Just because the holding allows for 180 days, they might not need that much time. So, and like Jim said, sometimes it might be more appropriate to exit for one of the exclusions if you can't legitimately get a planned date locked down, and at least check in with them.
Okay, I think that's the last one. Paula, you move to the next slide, which kind of addresses Christine Liskey's question about what's next.
Okay, and this is my slide. Previously, we mentioned opportunities for local staff and partners and even state staff to submit questions. And we have created a new performance FAQ page on Illinois WorkNet that all questions should be submitted through. And this will help us organize them rather than getting mixed in with our daily emails. And we've sent an email to all of the local program directors asking that they identify a point person who you would submit all your questions through. And so any questions that you have around the service matrix should be submitted through this FAQ page, and make sure that there is no personally identifiable information such as name, address, social security number, or other participant specific details that are included in the question. And there will be weekly opportunities for us to respond to your questions. There is no registration required for these weekly Q&A sessions, so save the URL link that's provided in the chat and join us at 1 p.m. each week to hear what others have asked and how we respond to them. If you are unable to join us, we will post those to the FAQ page. We do want to note that next week's Q&A session on March 8th is being canceled. And the next one that will be held will be on March 15th. So today, go ahead.
Yeah, Laura, if you're done with this slide, I wanted to just add to it.
Yes.
Okay, just as Laura said, we're getting a lot of questions. We are using up the entire hour of these these first 3 Q&A sessions. So we want to continue to receive those. And we've talked about the submittals a little bit. Just want to remind everyone what we're trying to do here with an FAQ page and these open Q&A sessions is build yours, your staff, your partners, your contractors, grantees, your abilities to think through the question yourselves because you've got the answers in front of you. So we provide you a litany of resources and we answer your questions. And just think what you see and what you hear and see how it relates to what maybe your question is. So the example is here would be, and not picking on anyone, David, we work together quite a bit. So I am going to pick on you, but David asked us kind of the same question that we had already answered. So think through what you've already heard and what you'll see on the FAQ when we post these questions and determine, most of the stuff isn't rocket science. You guys are really great people out there. You have a lot of wealth of knowledge, much more than I have, that's for certain. But I'm going to the same resources that are available to you to help you and answer your questions. Same with Paul, all of us here at OET, we're using the same resources, the act, the final regulations. I tell you, that's one of my go-to resources because DOL has done a great job of explaining why they've written things the way they've done. So, that's one of those I have handy all the time when I'm trying to help respond to questions. So we really want you to use your experiences and knowledge and abilities to review the information you've already received to maybe answer these questions before even having to submit them. So we really want to, I want to applaud all of you because you help me, you help all of us learn through the questions. But I think once you see the FAQ and we start posting these, you're going to see a lot of similar questions. So kind of decipher the question, see if it's the same thing you have in front of you. The reason we're having these submitted the way we are is because we are receiving many very similar questions that we have to condense into one question because we can't, we don't want to overload the page with all the similar questions. We also take some of the questions, break them down into their pieces because those pieces can help you respond to one of your questions that might be similar, but not quite the same. So just wanted to say, want to thank everyone first and also say, keep the questions coming and bear with us if we aren't able to get to your questions in one of our hourly sessions. We'll get them posted as appropriate to the website. I think we're going to try to get the first postings to this performance FAQ page before next Wednesday's was planned open session. So you'll be able to see what we've done for the first 3 weeks. And we'll continue to populate that through the month as we continue to get your questions. So appreciate it. Thank you again.
So what's next in the WIOA Services Matrix Technical Assistance? Well, we are finishing up with today's webinar, which is the second for the Youth Services Matrix. We have one more coming up that will be on March 21st. And that will be presented by the Illinois Community College Board, and they're going to discuss about the bridge programs and the ICAPS, IETs. And so I believe it will be extremely informational for Title I staff to learn about those and how those can assist their participants. And the next slide is resources. As always, as Mark mentioned earlier, these are our go-tos. These are where we go to try to get the guidance to assist you in answering your questions. And then the the next slide here is just some contact information. So if you have questions on policy, send them to me, Laura Dahm. If you have performance questions, send them to Paula Berry. And if you have questions specifically about the systems, then send those to Jim Potts, and we should be able to assist you in answering those questions. So this concludes our webinar. I want to remind you that it's being recorded today, and the link will be sent to all who registered, and you can share that if you as necessary.